Hello, and welcome to Ask the History Buff, a podcast that informs and educates about Canada's Christian history. I hope that you will be inspired to research Canadian history because you heard it on Ask the History Buff. Each week, we will explore the lives of influencers and events which they influenced and the legacy they left behind. Today, Canadians walk either in the light of the legacy or in the darkness because of the legacy. I am Lynette, a transplanted Canadian from the West Indies. I am not a degreed historian with letters behind my name, but what I have is curiosity and research. I have researched more of our Canadian history than most Canadians that I know. I'm always discovering new, interesting information about Canadian history, which really excites me. So that's why I call myself the Curious Canadian History Buff. My hope is that you will be encouraged to Google people's names and events surrounding them like I do, so that you will understand their impact on our society. And if you Google something you heard on Ask the History Buff, don't forget to follow the rabbit trails. I challenge you to click on every link and Google every person named in any article. And for Canadian Christian listeners, my encouragement to you is to be a Berean by searching out everything that you hear on Ask the History Buff. And that injunction comes from, or inference comes from, Acts chapter 10, verse 17. So go look it up. And if you're too busy to search, then just ask the history buff. I may have the answers, and if I don't, I will look for the answers and get back to you. So feel free to challenge my information anytime by sending your questions to info@christianrootscanada.org. You may teach me something new. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to like and share our podcast at christianrootscanada.podbean.com. Today's episode is taken from a free mini course I hosted last week. We looked at the lives of 5 influencers God used in His providence to found Canada. If you would like to purchase the recordings, the link is in the description below. Next week, on September 4th and 5th, I am hosting a series of free workshops which I would like to invite you to. We will be looking again at these influencers and more. And I will show you how to learn even more about them and the people that they came in contact with because of God's providence. The link to register is also in the description. So today, we're going to take a look at Samuel de Champlain, who was the discouraged visionary. At least I call him the discouraged visionary. So Samuel Champlain comes on the scene under Henry IV when he was fighting the Civil War in France against the Catholic League. And we will hear about the Catholic League in a little bit, in another lesson. But just keep that in mind. So he was a quartermaster in the war that Henry IV was fighting with the rest of France, because they did not want, Henry IV was a Huguenot, and they did not want a Huguenot sitting on a Catholic throne, right? So he served as a quartermaster. I don't know if you understand what a quartermaster is, but I'll tell you. A quartermaster takes care of the horses in the army. And in Champlain's case, he didn't just take care of the horses, he helped with developing strategy for where the troops would sleep and that kind of stuff. At the end of the war, the Civil War, his uncle's ship was used by the Spanish to take their troops back to Spain. Now, just to fill in a little blank there, with the Catholic League got the Spanish Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, to help them team up against Henry IV. And Henry IV became Henry IV because his cousin Henry III was the king at the time. Henry IV was Henry III of Navarre. We'll deal with Navarre in the next lesson, in another lesson. So Henry III of France was fighting the war with Henry III of Navarre against the Catholic League and Spain. So the Catholic League and Spain were kind of really in cahoots to fight against Protestantism. Right? At the end of the war, Champlain's uncle's ship was chartered to take the rest of the troops from Brittany and France back to Spain. When they got to Spain, the ship was further chartered to go to the Caribbean. Champlain's uncle said to them, "Sure, I'll allow you to use my ship, but my nephew has to go to watch over the ship." So a 19-year-old boy, he got on the ship and he went to the West Indies and to the Mexico, South America, Central America, where the Spanish went to plunder. So he took, because he was raised in a family of mariners and navigators, he took detailed notes. He kept daily notes of where they went. Now, the Spanish really did not want people to know where they were getting their gold and their riches. And that's why Spain was pretty rich, pretty wealthy to fight. They had enough money, gold, to fight wars. So that's how Champlain ended up in the Caribbean. After that, he came back to France, and through providential contact with other people, his account of that journey ended up in the hands of Henry IV. Now, you have to remember what was happening in the world around that time. There was that race between Spain and France to conquer the New World. So France aimed for North America, for Acadia and New France. Well, it was called New France afterwards, after the fact. And Spain went into, Florida and Louisiana, those places. So that's how Champlain is involved with all of this. The next time we hear about Champlain, he is in Tadoussac in New France with a guy called Aymar de Chastes. And that's because Henry sent him along on that first trip to, to New France with the explicit instruction to take notes and do his charting and cartography and that kind of stuff. All right, so Champlain went there first, and then the next trip he took was to St. Croix Island. Now, and then they moved from St. Croix Island to Port Royal. Now, if you listen to my podcast, Ask the History Buff, like I said, it's on the website under articles. You will hear a podcast on Saint Jean Baptiste Day. So the story is that Champlain, well, I'll back up. Another guy, a nobleman who fought through the wars of religion with Henry IV, his name was Pierre Dubois de Mont. Pierre Dubois de Mont put a monopoly of people and money together. Henry IV gave him a fur trading monopoly to come to Acadia and set up a new settlement. And they set off with Champlain. Champlain was his eyes and ears and navigator. And they set out to Acadia, which is Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI. So they went to St. Croix, they went to Acadia, and eventually their first settlement was on St. Croix Island. They found that island and chose that island on the day of June 23rd, which happens to be the day that is still celebrated all across Europe as a religious holiday, a Catholic religious holiday, because it's supposed to celebrate the birth of John the Baptist. My argument in my podcast is that St. Croix Island was just discovered on June 23rd. So June 23rd, they actually lived there on that island over the winter. And then they realized that was a wrong choice and moved over to Port Royal, which is in Nova Scotia. So my argument is that was the nucleus of the founding of Canada. And that's why June 23rd should be celebrated all over Canada, because that was the nucleus of the settling of Canada, the very first settlement. So fast forward to 1608, and Dubois only stayed on Port Royal with his settlers for about 3 years, and then he lost that fur trading monopoly, but Henry gave him another fur trading monopoly for New France, which is all of Ontario and Quebec. All of that was considered New France. So in New France, they went to Tadoussac. Dubois said, put Champlain as his lieutenant. And he said, okay, could you manage the fur trading at Tadoussac and at Quebec City? Those were the main fur trading areas. And that's how Champlain ended up in Quebec City. That continued with Dubois until Henry was assassinated in 1610, 2 years later. His second wife, Marie de Medici, she expelled all of the Protestants from the court. However, the Chamberlain of the king, Marie de Medici was really in the regent on behalf of Louis XIII, which is Henry's son, who should inherit the throne. But because he was 9 years old and he couldn't sit on the throne and make decisions, they wouldn't allow him to sit on the throne until he came of age, about 14, 15, somewhere thereabouts. So Marie expels all the Protestants from the court, and now Dubois, who was getting support from the noblemen and the other people, Protestants in the court, which is what the noblemen do, they get favors from there. Dubois now was kicked out. Now, between him and Champlain, wanting to keep Champlain in New France, their friend Nicolas Boulet, who was a Chamberlain, he agreed to allow his daughter Helen to marry Champlain. His daughter was something like 15 or something like that, 14, somewhere thereabouts, to marry Champlain, who was about 30, so that they can continue to have access to the French court. Okay? So that's how Quebec featured in all of this, with Champlain staying in Quebec while Dubois raised the funds to help supply the people who settled in Quebec City. So what happened to Champlain after Henry's death? Well, they had formed a company called the Company of Merchants. And that included merchants from Rouen and from Saint Malo, and also from La Rochelle. So when they weren't getting any more support, and Champlain got only a small cargo of furs that year, the merchants from Rouen withdrew from the company of merchants, and Dubois, in an effort to keep Champlain supported, he bought out their shares. He was so dedicated to having the settlement grow in Quebec City. Marie de Medici, then influenced by noblemen, she appointed different people. Marie de Medici was an evil woman, and she didn't like the Huguenots, but she was influenced by some noblemen to appoint a Huguenot nobleman as viceroy. Now, viceroy means the person on behalf of the king. Roy is king. So the viceroy to New France was appointed by Marie de Medici so that he would continue to keep Champlain as a lieutenant in the Company of Merchants. That happened in 1612, 2 years after Henry died. Okay, so then Marie passes an edict. You will notice in France, we say that we pass a law. In France, it was always an edict. So Marie passes an edict redefining Champlain's role under the crown, and she says he has to be involved in evangelism and in doing trade with the merchants, with the natives. Sorry. So when they saw the support from Marie de Medici, those merchants from Rouen and Saint Malo, they rejoined the company now, and they called it the Company of Canada. So that Champlain would carry out the part of the edict about evangelizing the nation, the natives, he recruited 4 Recollets to go to New France to evangelize the natives. Now, why did he choose Recollets? Because they were a sect of the Catholic Church that they always took a vow of poverty. They were not the greedy Catholics like the other Jesuits who were really concerned about filling their pockets. So Champlain, in an effort to fulfill the edict that Marie de Medici passed, he recruited 4 Recollets who are of nobler character because of their the particular monastery that they've come from. The Huguenot viceroy was Henry II of Bourbon. He was imprisoned by a Catholic enemy. Now, under Marie de Medici, there was so much intrigue in the courts. Oh, it was like a terrible soap opera. So she always got the Huguenots imprisoned and raised her Catholic friends and those supporters into positions of power. So this Catholic person got Henry II, Henry Bourbon II, imprisoned so that he could become Viceroy of Quebec. At the same time, the merchants who supported the Company of Canada, they had that conflict. Remember that Champlain has now brought it's a lot of Huguenots were involved in the trade. So Champlain now brings 4 Catholic priests to Quebec, and the whole issue of Catholicism versus Protestantism in New France, the merchants were just going at it with that. Because, like I said, most of the merchants on the seas were largely Huguenot merchants, most of them at that time. And a lot of them came from Holland. So then the company changed to the Company of Montmorency. And Champlain was confirmed as the Lieutenant of France by the new company. So, by the new Viceroy. The signatories of the Company of Canada, they had some infighting among them about, again, the importance of colonization versus trade. Some of them in the company wanted more trade than the emphasis on religion, on evangelizing the natives. But Marie had passed that edict that she wanted Champlain to focus on trade and religion. And Marie was very vindictive. The other aspect of that too is that Champlain had been there all these years searching for a passage to China because they thought that that's where the passage that everybody was looking for to get to India. They thought there was a way through the St. Lawrence River that would lead to China. I have a funny story to tell you about the Lachine Canal. Lachine Canal, Lachine means China, the China. And when Cartier, many years before that, had come to Quebec, he was told of a large sea that was in the middle of. He was also looking for a passage to China, to the Middle East, to the east, I mean. And the natives told him there was a large sea, but he tried to get to it, and he couldn't because of the rapids at the Lachine Canal. So the natives call it La Chine. No, Cartier called it La Chine because he thought he had gotten to China. So the China, La Chine, and now it's merged into the Lachine Canal. So that was just a little aside. So anyways, eventually Henry de Bourbon was released from prison, and he sold his stake to his brother-in-law, the Duc de Montmorency, and the name of the company changed to the Company of Montmorency. Eventually, the Duc de Montmorency withdrew his support of the whole thing, and the monopoly passed on to these Dutch guys called the De Caens. Now, I want to mention Montmorency to you because there is, if you ever go to Quebec City, just outside Quebec City is the Montmorency Falls, beautiful falls, and that was named after this Montmorency people. Anyways, so the Company of Canada and the Decaen brothers, they had, it was a Decaen company was the a father and an uncle and a nephew. The uncle was Catholic, the nephew was Protestant, or vice versa. Anyways, they had conflict between them and the Company of Canada because, of course, the Company of Canada, listen, look at that. This is 1621. Champlain has been there since 1608. So there is that conflict, and the crown, which is now 1621, there is a man called Richelieu, Cardinal Richelieu, search for him. He got involved with, he's already dipping his hands into the whole shipping thing and coming to New France. So the crown forced the Decaen Company and the Company of Canada to cooperate. Then when that happened in 1621, and because the Catholics had more influence over Champlain at that time, look at what happened. Champlain sides with Catholics to counter the influence of Protestants coming to New France. So that's where things changed with Champlain. All before Champlain was a Huguenot. And because he would not, he fought with Henry IV in the Civil War, as his with all those other Huguenots, and he came to New France with, and to Acadia and New France with the Huguenots who were setting up colonies. But Champlain sides with the Catholics to counter the influence of Protestantism. So together with the Recollets, now he writes a long list of complaints to Louis XIII. And, well, Louis is what? He was 9 years old in 1610. So this is 11 years old later. So he's 20 years old now. So he's on the throne and he's making decisions. But so here is Champlain wanting to cozy up to them. He probably needs help because it was hard going to try to settle a colony without finances. So Champlain sides with the Catholics to counter the influence of Protestants in New France. So together with the Recollets, he wrote a list of complaints to Louis XIII against the Protestants. So then Louis, and you will learn later on that Cardinal Richelieu was Louis's greatest advisor because Louis was a weakling. Cardinal Richelieu was strong. He was anti-Protestant. He has a whole long history there about how he basically usurped power from Louis. So Protestants were not allowed to trade in New France anymore. 1621 already, right? Look how long ago it was. So after that, the Catholics set up a seminary for the natives, and they set up judicial and defense system. They started organizing more along setting up administration and all of that. And then look at that, they increased Champlain's salary. Eventually, the Company of Canada and the Decaens were remember, they were kind of fighting conflict earlier on. By 1622, both companies were merged. So here comes the Company of 100 Associates, and this is a very, very, very important landmark. It's a very important mark in our history because as a newcomer to Canada, when I went to Quebec to visit Quebec as a tourist, that is what the tour guides gave me as far as I could remember. Canada started with the Company of 100 Associates. That was the story. I never heard anything else. I even have books that said, that was the beginning of Quebec. So this is 1627, and this all started under Henry in 1600, when he first sent people to Tadoussac. So this Company of 100 Associates was a turning point in the settling of New France, because Cardinal Richelieu, Armand Duplessis, he advised the king about the fate of the colony. He got the Duke of Montmorency to give up his viceroy position to who is that? Henry de Lévis. And they sent the first 5 Jesuit priests to boost the evangelization process. It wasn't going fast enough for them under the Recollets, so now they sent the Jesuits. Now, if you understand anything about the Reformation in France, you should understand quite clearly that the Jesuits led the way under Cardinal Richelieu. The Jesuits were rabidly against Protestantism. Cardinal Richelieu actually stole the catechism principle practices that Calvin had set up for the church, for the Reformed Church, to teach them doctrine, and Cardinal Richelieu had stole that particular plan of spreading the gospel using Catholic dogma to re-catechize what they called lapsed Catholic, to get them to come back into the Catholic Church. So Cardinal Richelieu has been, he is one of the most evil people that I have read about in the Reformation, that was so totally against Protestantism. So he sends those 5 Jesuit priests because he put this Henry de Lévis as the viceroy, and sent the Jesuit priests. And there is that place, if you go to the map, you will find in Quebec, Lévis, Levis, which was named after Henri de Lévis, and that's where they gave the Jesuit priests land to settle. Now, one of the Jesuit priests there is someone that a lot of Canadians know, because of the torture he endured with the wiping out of the Huron nation, and that is Jean de Brébeuf. So a lot of people know about Jean de Brébeuf. He's a brave, a priest who died as a martyr. But he was one of the 5 Jesuit priests that came under the viceroy of Henri de Lévis. So now Henri de Lévis gives his position as viceroy to Cardinal Richelieu, who abolished the company, the Deccan Company, and he sets up that Company of 100 Associates. When that happened, with the coming in of the Jesuits, you can do your research yourself, but for me, I have found that caused changes in the relationship between the natives and the French, because for the first time, the French sent an emissary and an Innu native to the Mohawks south of the Great Lakes for peace talks, and they were murdered. That didn't happen with Champlain. Champlain developed a really close relationship with the natives. He lived among them. He sent what's this guy's name? forgotten. But he sent that young guy to live among them so that he would continue to develop great relationships. He fought their wars for them, and he went traipsing off with them all over the country. When you read about Champlain, so you read it on the website, and you would see that Champlain had a really good relationship with the natives. So during that time, 1627 and 1628, Richelieu, and you will hear about La Rochelle. La Rochelle has been a really, really important part of France with the Huguenots. You will hear about La Rochelle in almost every lesson of the 5 lessons. La Rochelle, Richelieu did not want the Protestants to continue living in La Rochelle. That was their city. And it was on the port, it was a port city, and they could trade and get help from Britain and all kinds of stuff. The lengths, read about the destruction of La Rochelle. Richelieu went to every possible length, horrible, horrible lengths to destroy La Rochelle because he could not get the Protestants. He was so anti-Protestant. That started a war with Britain because Britain tried to help the people in La Rochelle, the Christians in La Rochelle, and they could not get to them because Richelieu built a seawall out in the ocean, far away, to block the port. And like he went through huge construction to build a seawall that the ships will not be able to come in and help La Rochelle. So that was part of the war with Britain. That was when the Kirk brothers went to Quebec City and they captured Quebec. That's 1628. When they captured Quebec, they took 400 settlers and a French ship to England. Champlain was on that ship. He was captured then and taken to England and then sent back to France. He was in France until 1632, and Richelieu, and I'm leaving out so much, Richelieu appoints his friend Isaac Razilly as the new lieutenant governor of New France in 1632. So Champlain came back to Quebec, but it was with a diminished position, and he came back to Quebec in 1633. Remember that he was taken to England in 1629. He was back to France in 1629. He did not leave France until 1633, not knowing if he would have his old position back. And then when he got to Quebec in 1633, he died 2 years later, in 1635. Have you ever wondered why Quebec is so different from the rest of Canada? Why is there a French presence in Canada? And where did they come from? If you have not delved into our history from France, I almost guarantee you that you didn't know that Canada was first colonized by persecuted Huguenots, the French Protestants. At first, a small group of them were given fur trading monopolies by King Henry IV. Then, others came after Henry IV died. They fled from Cardinal Richelieu and his brutal French Catholic regime. And why did that happen? Let me introduce you to the French Connection. The French Connection is a story-based video history course linking our history to the marble frieze mounted over the left doorway of the House of Commons. It shows Francis I on the left and Louis XIV on the right. These kings also bookend stories of the persecution of the Huguenots, which started under Francis I and continued until Louis XIV, except for under Henry IV. The course covers 200 years of history, uncovering the stories of the Huguenots who established the first colonies in the Atlantic provinces, Quebec, and Ontario. This program is the first of its kind. It's chronological, explicitly biblical, with video based stories for all of the family. It traces God's providence in bringing different people together to write His story. In September 2024, we will be introducing our new additions to the course, the new student workbook and the new answer key. The workbook contains questions, quizzes, projects, essays, extra readings, supplemental videos, a final test, and so much more. You will also get 6 modules, which breaks down into 26 video stories and lesson outlines, as well as an audio version and an ebook. There are also maps and charts and timelines and photos and other extra student only resources. So here's the steal of the deal. Compared to other Canadian history courses, you get 26 video lessons, the audio version, so you can re listen to the content anywhere, anytime, an ebook, the new student workbook, the new answer sheet, and for homeschooled high schoolers, the equivalence of 1 Canadian history credit. Here's an extra bonus. You don't have to purchase annual licenses for each student in the same household. It's a one-time purchase deal. You have permanent access for use by all students in the same household.